Hello everyone and warm welcome to this year's Kastelholm talks, which are the 10th in order, so it's the jubilee this year, and we're very happy to have this audience from far and near to have you all here gathered today. We have this Kastelholm talks have always been under the protection of President Tarja Halonen, who unfortunately could not be here with us today, but we're very happy that her diplomatic advisor, Hanna Gehör, is here, and she will read us a greeting from President Halonen. Please, Hanna.
Dear audience, dear friends, bästa deltagare, kära vänner. Det är fint att tala idag i att fira den 10-årsjubileet av Kastelholmssamtalen om fred. It is wonderful to speak to you today on behalf of President Halonen and to celebrate 10 years of Kastelholm talks on peace. President Halonen has been the patron of the talks since the start. In a decade, the world has changed a lot. We were already facing complex challenges, but today these challenges are bigger and more grave. Global peace is increasingly threatened by geopolitical tensions, human rights violations, inequality, and environmental crisis. Human suffering is immeasurable in many parts of the world. 1/4 of humanity, 2 billion people, are living in conflict areas today. Dear friends, kära vänner. The positive news is that this transformation we are living has also potential for a more prosperous and safer world. But it needs strong actions, dialogue, and international cooperation. The Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development remains a key for solving many of today's challenges. This year, with the UN Summit for the Future, we have a great chance to accelerate positive change and build trust. The choices we make will have consequences for the youth and the future generations. The largest youth generation needs to be engaged in decision making, and they must be provided with tools they need to realize their potential. Dear participants, bästa deltagare, we in the Nordics are a good example of cooperation as a way forward. Our regional cooperation today is strong and active, despite a long history of dispute, even wars. The Åland-Iceland solution continues to be an example of forward-looking and sustainable model for a future dispute resolution. The durability of the solution shows that the parties concerned were determined to set their disputes in the past and to raise well-being in the area. Looking forward to the discussion and hearing your views on how we can build a better world tomorrow. Our action has the power to provide the young people with sustainable future. Thank you. Tack.
Thank you, Hanna, and a remote thank you also to President Halonen for putting us in the mood for the discussions that will be future-oriented and still with the baseline of times that are also challenging, as the greeting said. My role now is limited to introducing the moderator. She will then introduce our great panel that we are very happy also to have here. And for me, it's a special moment, I think, for us, Sia, because Sia has been the director of the Peace Institute since 2007. I started working there 2008. I don't think I even said my name, Susanne Simolin, those of you who didn't meet me. I feel like family, huh? But now Sia has been appointed professor in law at Åbo Academy University, and not any professor of law, but professor of law with the direction of autonomy and self-governance. So it's very connected also to the Åland situation, and it's good for us that Sia's knowledge will be within reach for the Peace Institute and also for the Ålandic Society, which we are very happy about. But without further ado, I will hand over to Sia as moderator, and you will introduce the panel, and we're very much looking forward to the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. It's, one would think that if you have done this 9 times earlier, you feel confident and relaxed. But the future is always unknown, and this goes also for the 1.5 hours ahead of us. Some people think this looks like TV, and everything is very well directed, and you know exactly what will be said. This is not the truth. The truth is that we have had 9 pages of notes, but we have no script, because the future has no script. So we will have a conversation, as the idea of the Kastelholm Peace Talks has been from the beginning, a conversation which is not a debate, but an exchange of experiences and knowledge, and to some extent guesses, intuitions about the future. And if I start on the really dark side that President Halonen also wanted to point out, not only are there all these factual problems, I think that there is also the problem of the lack of our imagination or our energy towards thinking of something different. And this is why we need to think of how we ourselves are thinking about the future, which is a very trendy subject in, I don't know if you have noticed, the Peace Institute is quite often ahead of time in defining what are the big important words, and of course the future is extremely trendy. And it was also, as was said by Susanne, an early decision and a wish also by President Halonen to have a strong intergenerational dialogue around this theme and around the Kastelholm Peace Talks. And what I'm particularly happy about this year is that not only is there intergenerational dialogue in the panel, but we also have a very rich audience, richer than ever before, and I think this is very important. And these ideas are not really new, so we can say that if this has been discussed since the antiquity, it's bound to be discussed also a long time ahead of us. And Jean-Jacques Rousseau, I think, was the one who wanted the younger generation to have a stronger weighted vote in elections, so he was trying to experiment. And for this reason, I will start by presenting Lotta Tuominen, who is a student from Jyväskylä University, and you study social policy. You are also an extremely energetic person, which is, of course, how we all remember our youth. I'm sure the older generation agrees with this. You have been a coordinator for the peace work at the Finnish Scouts and a member of the Youth Peace and Security Network in Finland. And you have also worked very actively within the EU in matters concerning peace and cooperation, also through the International Committee of Alliancy. So you have already done extremely much already. And I wanted to ask you, in all these activities and in your personal life, if we accept the idea of Jyväskylä University professors who say that the private is also very political, what does it mean to think about the future in your generation and in your personal experience?
Well, thank you, Sia, and hello everyone. I'm really happy to be here today. Well, Sia just listed basically everything I've ever done in my life. And I can agree that it's a lot. And whenever someone asks what I do, why I do it, or how I do it, how do I have the motivation to do all of this, I think a very important or very, very simple answer to all of that is community. What I want to do is I want to strengthen communities around me. Why I do it is because I feel like we are getting enough of messages from the whole society that we should be able to make it by ourselves, all alone, and that our individual choices are the ones that matter. Although there is quite a lot more. Often when we criticize this idea of like focusing too much on the individual, we decide to take a really broad aspect instead, looking at structures and the whole society and states and so on. But even if we look at both of these levels, the individual level and the societal, we still forget that there's so much in between. There's always the communities, the different sized ones, whether they are student unions or sports clubs or kindergartens or whatsoever. They all have so much power to change the world in a sustainable way that isn't based only on forcing or demanding, but on participatory processes where everyone has a say on the agenda that said community wants to take further. And yeah, just like you said, Sia, and how Kari Palonen from Jyväskylä has said, even the personal is political, and I agree with that. Of course, it matters what we dress, how we live, what kind of houses we have. But at the same time, I am quite tired of the individualistic approach that I think is especially hard on young people. I think we get a lot of messages where we get this idea that every single life choice you make is on you. It's completely in your own hands, and if you fail, it's your fault. And I am highly against that, which is why I want to work with different communities and strengthen even those communities that I'm not personally part of. Well, how do I do all of this? That is also thanks to communities. Of course, I wouldn't be here today without all the people I've met along my way who have supported me, who I've learned from, who I've become friends with. That is so valuable. So along my way as a sort of youth activist, I have struggled a lot with the image of future that I want to build, because sometimes I'm afraid that what I see as playing the long game could actually be just sustaining the current status quo. Because, you know, especially when you work in like international politics, you of course have to be really patient. But at the same time, I sometimes get afraid that what I'm doing might actually just feed the existing systems instead of creating new ones. And I think that's really relevant concerning NATO, for example, which I think my colleagues will also talk about. Like, should we try to change NATO from the inside, or just try to somehow criticize it from the outside? Or can we at the same time support arm trade, like sending arms to Ukraine and promote non-violence? I think those are big questions, and I don't have very strict answers to them, but I think this is where the concept of utopias can be super important and useful, because that is how you create a bigger picture of the kind of world you want to go towards. Like, even if you take baby steps and you will never reach the actual utopia, it can still be something that leads you on your way. And although I just said that utopias are something in the future, I still also think that utopias can exist. They can become reality for 1 minute at a time at a certain place. Like, for example, I just recently had this dinner with my a local activist group for Palestine that we have in Jyväskylä. And we had this dinner at a Turkish friend of mine who served us with the most delicious dinner. And during the dinner, we were discussing our future activities, but also our feelings about the situation in Palestine, having like this peer support. And you could trust throughout the evening that everyone shared the idea of absolute human rights, but there was still also room for disagreement on how the world should be organized and so on. And yeah, there was something about that night that really struck me. And afterwards, I was like, I understood that there was one kind of a utopia for me, because that is just what I want to build outside of that little apartment, outside of that little evening. I want the whole world to be a bit more like that. In a way, you could also think that there's something utopistic about Åland and the way things are here. I mean, no.
It's utopistic and still we are here.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me about it. But if if you were to describe Åland without the word Åland in some other place and time, it could sound absurd, it could sound like something impossible, but it's not. It is reality here, and I think that's a great idea. Yeah, so maybe just to...
So you opened up, I think, in a very rich way, and it makes it easy also to continue, because I think that you pointed a lot to the individualistic condition in which many people think that they exist or feel that they exist. And at the same time, I think if you think really about the idea of the future, it's a very anti-egoistic idea. Because if you really get deeply dark, we can say that the only certain thing is that we quite soon will all die, sooner or later. And in that sense, the future forces us to think about something else than ourselves, isn't it? Including future generations. So I now turn to our next speaker, K.G. Hammar, Archbishop of the Church of Sweden from 1997 to 2006, and of course a priest. He's also a theorist of theology, a researcher, a teacher, and an author. Some of the most fantastic, short, and very forceful arguments around peace in recent years have been written by K.G. Hammar in books such as Fred är vägen till fred, The Peace is the Way to Peace, and the untranslatable Lilla Fredsboken, because how do you translate the Little Peace book? It sounds very strange, but at the same time, it shows the richness of the concept of peace. He has also been visiting professor in Lund at the university at the Center for Theology. And he's also very known for being provocative and an activist in a number of occasions. And as someone said already earlier, a very courageous person. So, you have also been troubled, K.G. Hammar, by the individualistic nature of our societies. And how do you think about this? Isn't it on the other side very heavy to ask us, quite weak people, to think altruistically or to think and care about others, not only people?
Thank you. Nice to be here. I heard a lot about these talks, so it's nice to be part of it now. Time is short in many ways, and we all hear the alarm reports almost every day. Yesterday we heard about the oceans becoming warmer much faster than the researchers think or thought. And we have all the time we get about the biodiversity diminishing very fast, and the greenhouse effect and all these things. So we know that we have big problems. And if I am courageous enough to say that I don't think we have any future if we don't change. And that is, to me, not an individualistic burden, but a possibility for us to look upon ourselves in a different way. I got stuck in the title of these talks, The Future and Us, because everything depends on what we mean by us. Who do we include in us? Is it our family and our country, our island and our Western world, or the fortress Europe, or mankind, or do we include all the living entities in this world? Those we are so dependent upon and entangled with. Yesterday we had some short reflection in front of the art, the piece of art outside the town hall, I guess. And that was really about entanglement, that we are nothing on our own. And that is the big tragedy in our human development, this individualistic trend that we have in some way thought that the task to find a meaningful life is upon me as a single person and as a competitor with other people and so on. This is, if we are the so to speak, conscious development of the universe, we should arrive at another answer than we have got so far. You are alone in creating the meaningfulness for yourself. I want to combine the violence of the wars we have, the increasing violence, the arms production and the development of arms when we can kill one another how many times we want, with the violence we exercise against nature. I mean, it's the same kind of violence. And the problem is we, as human beings. We have, so to speak, no future if we don't change when we look upon ourselves. We cannot see ourselves as lords and masters of the rest of the existence. We are not superior, we are not separate, and we cannot deny that we have built our position on violence against other peoples of the earth, and against the rest of creation, as a Christian call it, or nature, or whatever, the rest of the living entanglement of this planet. We must abandon that kind of self-identity and reinterpret ourselves and include many more in the us of the title. Because the promising thing is that we have a future if we change. We have the capacity to change. And we mustn't listen to all others who say what we should be, but listen to ourselves. We listen to those who are experts, and we listen to our own experience, but we also should listen to our deepest heart. I mean, what we really want, what we really appreciate, what we really value, and ask ourselves, who am I, and whom do I want to be? Do I really feel satisfied by being a competitor on this planet with other living entities, or being a consumer and as the final goal? So we have to abandon modernity's hardcore, in the sense that it has put the human being in the center of everything, the only subject of the universe, and also built that position on violence. And also the denial of the modernity that we can build on eternal growth, the understanding that everything will just suffice, we can go on and don't change our whole approach, and interpreting progress and development in material terms. And this was originally the Western understanding, but has become global in the sense that we have spread it all over in an imperialistic way. Tempting, because it has been very fruitful for us. I mean, modernity is full of gifts to us as human beings, but at the same time we have lost our sense of reality when we have abandoned our relations with other things. So the change must mean that we see ourselves as part of a bigger whole, as we see ourselves as a piece of the web of life, that we find our meaning in sustaining life, giving life to the whole, and it is our possibility. I want to conclude this short introduction by citing, you know, John Donne. He lived at the same time as Francis Bacon, who is one of the pioneers of Enlightenment and so on, one of your favorites, I guess. Yes. But they live at the same time, and to Francis Bacon, the role of us men really, was actually to rape the nature, to take what we wanted. It was all there for us. But John Donne, he was a dean in St. Paul's, and they both lived in London and died in the 1620s, both of them. And he wrote the famous "No Man is an Island," and that we all know. But it continues, entire of itself. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of a continent, a part of the whole. And then he continues, every man's death diminishes me because I am involved in humankind. The last sentence, we have to forgive him that he lived in the 17th century, but the last sentence we should say that we are involved in the web of life, in everything that exists.
So it's striking, I think, that the bridge between the generations seems to be the word change. That for a number of different reasons, this is not in accordance with what we experience as the most important. And K.G. Hammar, you used words which, of course, push us straight into the hands of B. Puranan, because you questioned enlightenment, and of course the heritage of enlightenment is research and knowledge, or the way we think also about research and knowledge. And I think in a world like today, where there is so much anxiety and uncertainty, one way of lowering this anxiety level is to try to understand better what is really happening. So in that sense, I truly believe that there is a connection between managing the uncertainty of the future and the role of knowledge and research in this. And you, B. Puranan, you have worked with research for very many years and from very many different angles. You have been interested in what K.G. Hammar actually mentioned, the values. What are our values? What is driving us ahead? What is it that we put as the meaning in our lives and which appreciate the most? And you have worked for a very long time with the World Value Studies. I'm sure you will tell us much more about it. And now you are affiliated with the Swedish Institute for Future Studies. We may return on this. So scientists, they do surveys, they do forecasts, they do probability studies, they do statistics, they do scenario, you study continuities and breaks, black swans, and the importance of the butterfly effect, and so on. How much can we know then about the future and our values through the work you do?
Oh, that was a question. And as you hear, I'm having a cold, so I hope my voice will manage for this. Please excuse me for that. I would like to add actually to change that K.G. Hammar took up here, and that with another word, responsibility. Because what kind of change do we think about? We think about long-term for the responsibility of mankind, for the survival of our globe. And as you say, Sia, we try via science to understand better what is going on, and we do that all the time. We live now with a very strong narrative around that everything is deteriorating, that everything is getting worse and worse, democracy is death. We have predictions around a lot of things. And the theme we have here about peace, really, how could we discuss that topic with the situation in Ukraine, for example, and how our countries, Sweden and Finland, has suddenly gone into NATO? How should we address this? I hope we can discuss it more thoroughly now during this speech together with you. I was very happy when you mentioned the importance of the young people, because one thing, when you think about foresights and the future, it's already here with the youngsters, like you, Lotta, and many others, because per definition, you will live in the future much longer than me and Koge, even if you would like to be there. So I think it's very important to think about that. That's why I would like to take up 3 short notices now to begin with. And one is actually when you talk about being young, and that's longevity. Longevity, meaning that we are living longer and longer and longer. We have quite many that are centenarians that are more than 100 years now. We have a lot of people like me and Kogi that refuse to stop thinking about these things. And we would like to join forces with you, Lotta, and your friends, because longevity can mean very important things. It can mean adjusted life years, quality of life years. What would we like to do? We have a lot of people in our age that would like to help and support with the experience that we had gained during our long lives for this. And I think since we have 25% of our populations almost in that age group, being 65 plus, we can do a lot together, join forces and do it together instead of seeing it as contradictory to each other. So that's one of the very important things. And some of my colleagues at the Institute for Future Studies, and last week we had a very interesting seminar with Oxford University where they work with the same things, to see the link between longevity and education. People are getting much more educated. We can learn a bit more. We can understand a bit more. What will the implications be for the future, if we think about that? That is one thing to take up. Also, this health span extension, that we stay alert and cognitively alert much longer. What makes life worth living? To put these questions on the table for the future. I think when Kogehammer, when you say, who is us? Us must be every living species on our earth, everything, everything that is alive in a way. That's the broadest definition we can think about. And very important to have that as a platform, but also thinking about us, human beings, what we can do, because we can do a lot. So longevity is the first important part there. The second I would like to say, that's the question of tolerance and intolerant people. I mean, why do we have this situation today with these wars? How did we come into that situation with war in Europe again, one more time? And to think about that, I also would like to make a quotation. I don't have it in my mind, so I've written it down. I'm not having your memory like that. But it's someone who lived more recently, just when the Second World War ended, Karl Popper. And Karl Popper, he wrote something that we could call the paradox of tolerance. And what Karl Popper said was that, I quote now, "Unlimited tolerance will lead to the disappearance of tolerance. We need to put borders to the intolerant forces. But how do you do that? And when you at the same time will defend freedom of speech, letting everybody give his say, and understanding how can we do that? And I believe this is vital for the situation where we are today. How can we defend a tolerant society? Well, certainly not by suppressing intolerant values, but instead coming up with rational arguments, trying to keep them in check by public opinion, for example, that we together speak out and say what we think when it comes to intolerance. And these intolerances are not just when it comes to the question about who is right and who is wrong. It's also about the topic of today's talk here, peace. How could we defend a peaceful development when we have intolerant forces who invades another country in Europe? I mean, where do we draw the lines? And then we had this talk, if it was Lotta yesterday or this morning, about NATO. I mean, it's a complicated situation when you have war equipment as a way of defending a country. And then I would like to quote another one, and that's Stoltenberg, who is leading the NATO organization. He claims that NATO is needed because to conserve the peace for the future. And I was thinking, how could he say that? Well, he explained, it is actually a question about protecting us against war. NATO is protecting us against war. It averts war. It wards off war. When I heard that first, I thought, how does that? How could he have that kind line of reasoning? And I believe actually it is quite interesting. What if we, from the inside, that was what Lotta mentioned, from the inside of organizations like NATO, and Sweden and Finland and many other good forces coming in, can also build peace from the inside instead of standing outside and arguing. We know that some people are advocating because they are frightened, because they have fear, really fear. But what do we answer then? Well, probably we need to put confidence into people. Rely on yourself. And that we can do together. So it could be quite interesting. I did myself a couple of small pieces of research on the willingness to defend one's country. And what we can see is that most people are willing to defend their countries. It doesn't mean that they need to be by weapon. It can be by reasoning. It can be by defending values and social norms. And that is what we must strengthen. The values and the social norms that keeps us at peace. But we need to do that also inside organizations where quite many believe that weapon is the solution. Our solution is not weapon, it's peace. But peace must be much more dynamic and offensive and go into the structures instead of standing outside the structures. That is, I can't see any other way. I mean, there is a need for the young ones to have us older ones. It's a need for the people with the trained military people to have the peace people. I mean, we all need to join forces if we are going to have a positive future for tomorrow. That's my line of reasoning. And that means that change is needed together with responsibility. And I would like to end by saying like this, it's a say that I think we can reflect on. Even if we are pessimists today, it's certainly easy to be pessimist today, and it's very modern to be it too. It's a narrative that everybody's a bit chic to be negative. Even if we are negative in our brain, we need to be positives in our heart, because a pessimist wins whenever he loses.
Thank you for these introductions. I will try to pressure now a little bit, because of course there is the danger of defining what the good forces are, and I see a certain tension between some of the arguments that you mentioned. So on the one hand, we have the fact that the West and we, the Nordics, are in a very privileged position because we have used our resources and our knowledge to make the most out of our lives in a very rational, in the way we think way. That has then resulted in the individualistic situation. Whether it's a causation or not, I won't say, but this is the situation in which we are. And at the same time, we see also ourselves as the good forces that will bring the change or to the positive. And I wanted to reverse the order and start by B here. What do we know about these values globally through the enormous work that you do in the World Value Studies? What kind of values do you study, and what can we see about these differences? And perhaps later we can turn to change. Yes.
Thank you. I'm allowed to. Just, we have been working for more than 40 years, systematically interviewing people face to face, physically interviewing people. I mean, hundreds of thousands of interviews repeatedly and with time series, so we can see change during this time, which is vital when we discuss this. What is new and what is there all the time, and what is the directions of the change. And I must say, Ireland, and maybe some of you have seen the culture map, it's made from all these interviews, and I've been happy to be Secretary General for almost 30 years with this. I've lived with it basically my whole grown-up life. What can we see then? If we try to put it into some main directions, we can see that the world is better, actually, even if we talk about how bad things are. We live much longer, we live much healthier, and with we I mean not just us up here in the northern parts of the West, but globally we can see that we have poverty reduction, for example. There's a lot of important things. Medical research is making fantastic improvements when it comes to many things. I mean, there are backdraws, of course there are, but if we talk about the main trends, we can see it, for example, women's right, SRHR, sexual and reproductive health rights, to have the right to decide if you would like to marry with whom and have children or not. All these kind of important things to make you yourself and family can make the decisions, not someone else. That is one part. The democratic development. There is a lot of people saying that democracy is death now. It is not dying. It's quite vibrant in many parts, so that's also a part. Communication, we know much more now. We have the educational level, which is very important. But also communication, even if we are very upset about things on the media. I mean, we still know so much more, and it's spread and we can have contact. So in essence, even though we have all these problems and we can discuss the survival of the earth, etc., if we take us as human beings, we are much more knowledgeable and we have a much longer future to see if we can take care of things. That's why I say responsibility goes together. So in essence, empirically, we know we can kind of prove that this is happening.
And from what I understand by looking at the map and learning a little bit more about the World Value Studies, there is a lot of emphasis put in what can be simplified as saying freedom and individual freedom, and you talk about freedom values. And isn't there then some tension, I would say, with your argument, K.G. Hammar, about abandoning actually your central human position? And even with you, Lotta, when you emphasize community rather than individual freedom. So try to tease out a little bit more about what are the choices we have and how should we think about freedom values and freedom-oriented thought, which some would say builds on control or power over others.
You could say many things about this. I will start with responsibility, because the word response, I mean, to be responsive is very important when it comes to being open to all the signals that the whole of life is sending to you. So responsibility means to take responsibility, but it means also to have some kind of tenderness, humility, to not to control, but to be a part of. So it's a wonderful word to reflect upon. And I also want to reflect upon the question of borders, because we all know borders to be psychic healthy, but we should also be able to transcend borders in order to widen our worldview and the view of ourselves. So borders is a tricky thing, and then you must be very careful that you don't think that borders are necessarily national borders, because we all have transcended national borders in Europe. And now it seems to be the nation state that becomes the most important thing to defend. And I question that. And it's more about seeing that we also are part of the other one on the other side of the border, and take consequences of that. So then you could always ask, who is winning of your defending your national border? I mean, we can see who is winning on the Ukraine war. It's all those who produce weapons. I mean, just a few years ago, we worked a lot to diminish arms trade and so on. And now that seems to be priority number one in the European Union, to produce as much as possible. And it might be that we have to say that, well, this is the fact just now, but we must not forget that it will never create peace. War has never created peace. But you must see someone to work with in the other one, in the enemy. Jesus said, love the enemy. And love doesn't mean to like. It means to respect as a person, as someone who has the same value as you have. I mean, even the enemy has the same value as you have. So it's a different approach if you recognize that you are part of the other. The other one is also me, so to speak. It is about widening the we concept.
So what do the value studies show us about the spectrum of values and also transgressing those national state borders? Because I think this is one way of looking at your work, is that these values are not nation state bound in some sense.
Thank you for raising that topic. For example, we have a lot of migrants all around the world, migrating all the time. It's been for, I mean, where do you belong when you migrate from say, the MENA region or sub-Saharan Africa up to the Western Hemisphere? That is very important to follow. I mean, they don't follow borders. And you need to take your roots with you. I mean, your identity. We talk about identities, and I think that's very interesting. When you say the we concept, the Nobel Prize winner in December in economics was a lady, Claudia Golden, and she talks about we. Women's economic empowerment was her subject that she got the Nobel Prize for, and it's really very important. Women all around the world, I mean, whatever country you live in, you face something that she has shown by being an economic historian, showing that a U-shaped curve, not the way we earlier thought about life, that you start and you climb up and then you're on the top of your life and then you go down and dead. That was we all know about it. She turns it the other way around and she says, no, you're wrong, it's a U-shaped curve. And this U-shaped curve about women's economic empowerment means that women are very strong in the beginning of their lives, and then when they are in the middle with the kids, they have very little possibilities in most countries around the world, whatever nation we talk about, and then it comes up again. And this is so interesting, this we concept. I think if we could enlarge it to the masculinity part of the world as well, because we are certainly there together. She's discussing women's economic empowerment because they are weak. And I think one of the reasons why we have war is that it's men that are fighting with other men. It's very few women. So we really have a masculinity, femininity question here that we also need. So the more we can get women have an economic empowerment, they will also be much more able to contradict this development that we see. Look at the women in Ukraine, how they fight together. But they do not fight with weapons. They fight with values. They fight with defending the values of the right to live in freedom in their country. And that is what peace work is about.
Lotta, would you like to comment on the ideas of values and the discussion until now?
Yeah, well, to add to your last point also, well, that also resonates to young people, because young people are also doing a lot of peace work, for example, in Ukraine, but also on the borders of Ukraine, right on this moment. For example, the Scouts have been there since the beginning of the war, helping to get aid to the victims and so on. But yeah, in your very first comment, you asked the question, what makes life worth living? And I think that really is a very in the core of this whole discussion, if we want to move on to a truly sustainable society in order to keep this planet alive, because all the things you described, all the good developments in the world, I may be a bit pessimistic, but I feel like they don't really matter if we don't find solutions to the climate crisis and the biodiversity loss and so on. So so we have to ask the question, what are we here for, and what are the actual freedoms that we should strive for? Is it really the freedom to consume as much money as you ever want to, or could it rather be the freedom to go to nature whenever you want, or the freedom to spend time with your loved ones instead of having to spend 8 hours a day in work, for example? So yeah, I think these are in the core of the discussion. Also because I don't see any real political change happening, like drastic change, without a cultural change that precedes it. And that is why I think, it's just so important to also focus on emotions and on our lifestyle and all of that, not just on policy papers and so on, because they're not gonna happen, or they're not gonna last if people don't feel like the transition is fair and just, and if they don't feel like they're actually winning when we are changing to another kind of lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. The audience is applauding. And I think what is really, really interesting in what you're saying is that you are both elaborating around the idea of time, in the sense that what is the lifespan of a human who works a certain number of years and does a certain number of things. Also, what is the lifespan of different species or of the earth as such? And you're saying, Lotta, 8 hours a day. What does that really mean? So let us then talk about time, because I think that this may be, we are all extremely stressed. Here we sit with 3 clocks, for example, 3 watches, yes. So time is at the essence, time is money, some say. At the same time, there is the New Testament use of the term kairos, keros. I always have a Greek word to use if possible. And this kairos or keros is something very different from the chronological idea of chronos that those who have been at the Lyceum have heard speeches about that difference. And it seems to me that this has to do with the responsiveness that you are also picking up from B. Kågehammar. What is it to be in the good time, in the keros, and how do we think, and later I will put questions about the time in the value studies as well. What do you say, Kågehammar?
There is an old Jewish Christian terminology, the 8th day, den 8:e dagen, the 8th day. And that means that you break away from the chronos, from that was is already predicted and caused by the previous all the time. And it means that you can, instead of adding to the life you have, you open yourself to receive what is a gift, which cannot be controlled and predicted, but you open responsiveness, humility, which means being like the soil, humus. Humility is to be able to receive what is offered you, and not created by your own achievements. And in order to prepare yourself to live in, to be open to kairos, you cannot live in it, but you can be open to it and let it define your life. Then you must be prepared to think outside the box, which we all talk about something good, but what is very difficult, to think outside the box and be prepared to change, as we have talked about many times. also be prepared to listen to more voices in the universe or on the planet than you are used to. Break away from what you think is necessary and be open to a different kind of world, of a different kind of existence, being a human in a different way than we have in our Western culture been trained to think is the only possible way. We only think that this capitalistic economy is the only one. We don't see any alternatives. We don't put resources into finding alternatives, but we take it for granted at the same time as we see that this kind of life is driving us towards the disaster. I mean, that will be the planet's life-bearing capacity is being destroyed every day by the way we live. The planet cannot afford people like us. So either we change, so we are welcomed into the planet, or we have to go.
Do you want to comment this, Lotta?
Yeah, actually, to comment this and also to answer your question about 20 minutes ago about us maybe sometimes positioning ourselves as the good ones and talking as if we had all the answers. I think the world could be a lot better place if we, as in we, the people from the Western countries, also maybe especially the people from the Nordics, were also able to look at ourselves a bit more critically, just like you are doing right now. I think it's really useful. And we have been talking about democracy and capitalism and so on, and that's why I find it really important to also mention corporate power, which is getting huge, but is also quite often forgotten when we talk about democracy and the development of it. Big companies, huge companies are using so much power in the world today, and it's so abstract that it's really hard actually to even understand how much they are influencing our lives, although they have not been picked democratically. Just to note this.
So, B, back to the world value studies and your work. How do values change over the planet and over time? What conclusions can we change, for instance?
Yeah, we can. I mean, if we limit ourselves to, we have been empirically being able to do it for 40 years, and then you can take 40 years more because you do back from the people who were young at that time, at the end of 70s and beginning of the 80s. Yes, we can. I think one of the very important part here, what we actually started with when we talked about generation and what is happening, individualism has come up here now several times. It depends on what we mean with individualism, because what we see in the studies is that yes, there is an individualism, but doesn't mean necessarily that it's an egoistic and bad one. It can be an individualism that is social as such, meaning that you rely on each other, and that is what you see in most countries. So if you look at the culture map of the whole globe, you can see that, for example, the universal values that are the most important ones, that's family. That is what people are, not individualism. It's not. I don't know why it comes that we say that it's about individualism, because there is no trace of that at all. It is up in our countries, but it's limited to that part of the world. The rest of the world, and also in our countries, family comes far higher than the individual. Family is the universal value, and you can see it all around the world. So that is, and that has not changed over time. It's around 98% of the world population, something. It's really strong. But then when it comes to freedom, which is another trend, freedom, it doesn't mean freedom for you as an individual, but freedom to be able to make choices, relevant choices in your life. For example, for having children and having the possibility for bringing up children, having food for them, not living in poverty, having schools, learning to read, and that kind of very basic, that has nothing to do with individualism. That has to do with responsibility and the responsiveness, as you say. And that is also very strong and universal. So there you have a second very strong value, which is universal. A third one, when we talk about what we have in common, because we tend to always talk about the peculiarities for special areas instead of talking about what's togetherness and what do we have that binds us in common, that binds us together. And here comes your peace work, which is important. There is no normal living growing up persons in any country, not in China or Russia or any country that long for war or for getting into conflicts. They would like to have a peaceful life. So we must build our concepts for the future on what is common ground and that we can see, and that is empirically very well grounded. While the other, more communicated within media, media always focus on differences and aggressions and dramatic things that happens, and then we kind of think that, oh, the whole world is just terribly, terrible, terrible. It really isn't if you look upon these new things. And I would say also when it comes to companies, I mean, there are many companies that do really good things. Think about the medical pharmaceutical industry when it comes to COVID and the COVID situation. I mean, how fast they found a working vaccine. That's an excellent example. I mean, it can serve for good and for bad. It's not the science and the knowledge in itself is what is important, I think, when it comes to that. If I take then the other side, differences. These are the common ground that's important that we can see, and that is what we need to rely on. When we talk about differences, we have mentioned here the individualism, yes, but what kind of individualism? There are certainly egoistic trends where you think about yourself only and you ruin the world. We have the climate crisis, which is the example really of what is happening. There we need to, and that's why I took up Karl Popper. Because sometimes you need to be intolerant too. And in these cases, when we talk about the survival of the globe, when we talk about the climate crisis, we need to be less tolerant and much more intolerant. That is the only way. We can't accept it. And we need to make lists, rule of orders of things where we should be intolerant and also be that together. Populism, for example, when it comes to right-wing populism, where you spread hatred against people coming from another nation, coming from another. I mean, like migrants are really were very badly treated, and they can be asylum seekers, for example, and you push them away like you do not take responsibility. So you're back to responsibility again. These are two very important parts where we need to be very strong in and where Karl Popper is right. We need to be intolerant here, because if not, the intolerant forces will take over. And that is what is happening when it comes to climate change. That is what's happening with the attitudes to the migrants, for example, in the Western world, when people vote for far-right populism. And we stand now and foresee an election in the US this coming autumn. That is really scary. There too we need, I mean, if we want democracy to be safeguarded, we also need to be strong when it comes to these things and to speak out loudly.
If I may connect to an issue which has not, and a word that has not yet been used, but which is somehow almost below the surface all the time, you have emphasized not only individuals, you have also mentioned the nation state, you have mentioned family, you have mentioned community and a number of organizations. K.G. Hammar, you are have been the head of a very strong institution, and you work both with World Value Studies, which is a global network of researchers, so we have to do with these institutions. And my question then is, how is it between trust and institutions? If we think about the future, and you want us, K.G. Hammar, to be open and responsive, how is it with the trust we may have then against all others and everything around us when we know that there are these some would say crazy people who love violence, or dictators that have a great interest, or corporate interests that want to produce weapons. How do we do this trust, and what is then the role of institutions as you see it? If we would think a little bit removing some of the burden from the individual's shoulders. Lotta, would you like to start from your many? You're also a scout, I forgot to say that. That's very important.
Yeah, I'm a scout. Institutions, that is a big question. There are so many kinds of institutions, but I think, well, many of them are also like sustaining the current system. They are a really fundamental part of it, which makes it, this is clearly a question I don't have a really clear answer for, but I think this is in the core of my struggle that I often have, like should I try to influence them from the inside, or try to like completely get rid of them? But I think it's not that black and white. I think you can be critical while working from the inside and while taking the like little steps to the right direction. Maybe I'll give some more thought to that and let others speak.
I guess it has also to do with this, is cooperation and good relations in society the result of the trust that we already have, or is trust, on the contrary, the result of the cooperation and the institutions? Do you want to come back on this?
Yeah, please. I have one more thought, just to say about the idea of individualism that you just addressed, which was very welcome. It can mean many different things, but I think it's actually the institutions often that are like emphasizing individualism. Like, for example, in my home country, Finland, we are right now like having many new policies implemented that put even more pressure on the individual to take responsibility over everything in their own life, like your income and your health and all these things that, of course, you are responsible for them in a way. But before, I think we had more universal services that meant that you can also trust the society to take care of you when you're not able to do so yourself. And so I don't necessarily say that people are like egoist when I say that individualism is really strong. I think we have also built, and now we are strengthening these institutions and structures that encourage us to think that way, that we are here alone and not together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think one could differentiate between confidence in. You can have a confidence in some kind of organization, but trust in people. I mean, then you are talking about individuals. Mm-hmm. And it's quite interesting to see how trust works. For example, you can have trust within. That is what we mentioned earlier, trust within the family, for example. That's an important part. But then you have statements. We, for example, have one statement. Most people can be trusted, and people are generally quite high on that. You have a belief in other people, on a generalized trust. Mm-hmm. But then when you continue and then you ask, trust with people you meet for the first time, then it's much, much lower, and it differs between different parts of the world. For example, us here up in the north, we are extremely high on trust to people we meet for the first time. And that is unique for this part of the world. While many other parts, you need to know people before they show that they are trustworthy. I.e., we need to talk about trustworthiness. And trustworthiness is another thing than trust and confidence. And these mechanisms are quite complicated, actually, when people decide on whether to rely on something or not. And then you have these people who can believe in flat earth society or whatever, that they do not take in any rational arguments, and that makes it difficult, because there you have extremely low trust to the society, trustworthiness is extremely low, and you have increasing groups of people who tend to lose trustworthiness in the society, and that is a dangerous process. While up here in the northern countries, we are still very high, both on trust to people we meet for the first time. We say welcome when people come. You don't. Earlier, when I grew up, we never locked our doors because might come someone, and of course there needed to be open doors. That is not the case anymore, so increasingly, but still slowly, we have this weakening of the generalized trust. I think it's extremely important to see the trust is connected to all these other things we talk about. It's the baseline.
Wouldn't it then, for you, Kåge Hammar, mean that the Nordics should also be very responsive? Are you convinced about our ability to be responsive?
Yeah, in a way we are. I mean, we often claim that we are the most secular people, society in the world, and your map and so on up there, the secular corner. But that's not true when it comes to the Swedes' relation to nature. I mean, there is a spiritual openness to being part of something that is greater than I myself. So in that sense, I think the Swedes are very promising as a spiritual experimental field in the future. You know, trust is the most important word in the New Testament, because to have belief in is not to have ideas about things, it is to have trust. Fiducia in Latin, and so on. So there is a cognitive misunderstanding that to believe is to have ideas about supernatural things. That's nonsense. To believe is to have trust in life, in God, in that you are taken care of, even if you cannot control your own life, and things like that. So it's a very important word. And that trust, as I see it, is reflected on our trust when we meet, as you mentioned. I think we shouldn't trust organizations. There is a devil in every organization.
Simone Weil was exactly of the same view, yes.
Yeah. Because, and I know from a lifetime experience that you must ask yourself, why is this organization here? What is the idea behind? And that you should trust if you have the gift to do that. But not the organization, the structure. Dag Hammarskjöld questioned the structure of the United Nations, and said, you must remember it's the idea about peace that is I'm giving my life to, not the organization. And when they ask, as I did last week, if you what you trust different organizations in the Swedish society, I always feel that, well, it's not about organization, it's about you have met people within the organization that you have trusted. And that can spill over to the organization, but you should always be a bit cautious about organization, so you don't be too loyal to it.
But there are some organizations, though. I mean, when you talk about communities, I mean, that more loosely organized civil society organizations. I think, do you agree we can trust them a bit more?
A bit more, yeah.
A bit more. Okay, that's good, because we need to think about.
We have to trust something. We cannot live without.
No. And then we have another one when we think about different generations. We have a problem with us being more older. We would like to think we are a bit wiser, wouldn't we?
We are.
We are. Then blessing. But then think. If we are kind of no importance, if young people believe that all elderly people they will die off, and then we will take over. It's a dangerous word. We have lots of elderly people with a lot of knowledge, and perhaps being wise, but we live in a society where it's not counted for, and that is really a dangerous mixture. How should we change that?
I don't know, but I must confess, I feel a bit guilty about dying off from this world which we have created. And we leave it to next generations, and I'm not there to contribute to the change. I feel guilty about that.
But it's not your responsibility to stay alive eternally.
No.
We started to talk about longevity, and you never know about the future.
Yeah. But many young people also have the sort of an opposite impression where it feels like young people are the ones who are not being heard. And I think a good example is that many youth organizations around Europe, for example, are advocating so that the voting age would be lowered to 16, for example. And really often when you talk about it, people are like, yeah, but they're not gonna know, they're gonna be so easy to influence on social media and la la la. And I think that's not a very nice thing to say, because, well, first of all, no vote is a wrong one. I mean, everyone has right to their opinion, no matter how it is formed. But also, I don't feel like all adults are that much more talented at it. So, yeah, just a note. But also, to what Yubi said earlier about like the like how important it is to trust the people around you, and how dangerous it can be if you lose all that trust. And I would also highlight that from the perspective of young people, because as many of you most likely know, there is this big polarization going on between young people and even genders, and there's a lot of young men especially who are losing the trust towards other people and towards institutions. And of course, it's not just a question of age, it's also a question of class, for example. But there was just this new study about values in Finland, and it showed, for example, that a really crazy big amount of young men in Finland find it okay to push towards your own goals through violence, and that has been increasing, like the number of people who think violence is an okay tool. And it's scary, but I think there are very almost simple ways to change that development.
Do you want to?
Yeah,
Yes.
talking about violence, actually, people do not admit to that. So we have absolutely no data on it, but still, both you and I know that it exists. So we have this problem that some things are denied. For example, violence against women within families. We do know that it happens, and there is quite many women who are suffering from that. But if you ask people, they will not answer on these things. So we have this problem that we have a lot of data, and it's mainly very good, but on some certain subjects, you can't rely on it. Then you need to look for yourself, and that's why it's so important to also be out. I really like what you say about communities, because that is a very strong way of knowing what is happening. Another strong way is to listen to the elderly people, because they see things and can say things that younger ones will not say and adjust to. Then we have something more that we need to address when we have the possibilities here, and that is this gang criminality that we can see, for example, in Sweden now. You're blessed here on Åland, I have understood, but it's also very connected to drugs and drug dealers, and that is a poisonous, strong, dangerous development that we need to address and think about how to come to that. Right now, the only ones who has addressed this are the right-wing populists, and with putting them into jail. That is not a solution. I mean, it's not in the long run, but we need to address it. And I believe that going back to the concept of the family and the importance of what will we do with our lives, the quality that we would like to have in our lives, and see how can we start with the kids very early, as soon as they get look around themselves. I mean, in the preschool system, we need to work with the school systems in a way that makes sure that we see when things are happening in families and work with it. And we must be present. We must be there all the time as parents, but also as members of the society. There is no way it's too late to come and put them into jail when they are 16, 17 or whatever. Much before. So let us think about that as if you talk about the future, this is really very vital.
I think that there is all the time in our discussion this spectrum, at least, perhaps even a tension between understanding of life as a project with a certain goal that we want to achieve, at least to have a good job and be important in a sense, yes, be affirmed in many ways. And on the other hand, this more, I would say, laid back understanding of the responsiveness of receiving as a gift is what the word you used. And one of the things I had with me as a source of inspiration, let's see if I can find it here, is the poem of Louise Glück, which I think is one of the best critics against war in her poetry. And she criticizes Agamemnon and the Iliad. And he says that's what destroyed Agamemnon there on the beach. The Greek ships at the ready, the sea invisible beyond the serene harbor, the future lethal, unstable. He was a fool thinking it could be controlled. He should have said, I have nothing. I am at your mercy. So here you have this very rational project of the Iliad. In a sense, a wish of control, a wish to be intolerant to the injustice that was done. And the other approach which says, no, the poem is called The Empty Glass. So I will give you final rounds now for comments with this empty glass and Agamemnon on the beach. And ask you then, things are as they are, we have to accept them, we have to be responsive to what the situation is. How do we make change? I think this is the bottom line, because this has been the recurring theme. And would you like to start, Kogehamar? You had indicated you had thoughts already, so
well, not as a final round, but it can be. But
there won't be.
No, I know. I want to combine violence and wisdom. We exercise violence against nature, and we find wisdom in the indigenous people. We haven't mentioned them before, but we know where we can see cultures and religious, spiritual understandings of the whole and things like that in indigenous people, which we have regarded as primitive. And now it's the other way around. We are primitive in the way we behave in this nature, creation, society. You all know perhaps about the Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. It's very famous. Four presidents in the United States history are sculptured into that rock. And that rock was a holy mountain for the Lakota people. They could be there, and the mountains filled them with awe and wonder. Now people, millions of Americans move there. The colonizers moved there, not to find the wonder and awe, as the natives did, but to admire what we men can do. I read that 400,000 tons of stone was removed to create those four sculptures. This is really the clash between our way of looking upon nature. It's to our disposal. Just for fun, we can destroy what is regarded as sacred of other peoples. And we have to change. We have to look upon another in a more, with the indigenous look. That will, I think that is where we have the future.
Mm-hmm. It's very appropriate from the perspective of the Åland Islands being interested a lot in minority and indigenous affairs. I think that's very interesting that you mentioned that. Lotta.
Yes. Well, to sum up also a bit, I think my tips for making change are to build communities, and even in those places where they may seem unexpected. And in order to do that, you must remember to consider things as something else than just black and white. And for that, I thank you, Bea, for bringing also a bit more positive perspective to this discussion today. About communities and things not being black and white, I think one example that I want to still bring to this discussion is that when we talk about our relationship with Russia, for example, I often try to keep in mind that Putin has been in power since 2000, which is the year that I was born. So there's a whole generation of young adults who have lived under Putin's regime all their life. So if we just block them completely from any connection that we could have together, I don't know how things can actually ever change, especially if you agree with what I said earlier about the cultural change always preceding political change. And as my last guideline is to look for utopias in your own mind, but also in the existing or physical world around you. And everyone else has quoted someone during this discussion. I want to do that too, so I'm going to quote a dear friend of mine. His name is Oskari Hakala, and he's now doing his PhD in Tampere University. And a way that he presents himself whenever he gets the occasion is that he's someone who is eager to discover what the world should be like, because it can't be like this. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you to Oskari. And Bea, you have the final word.
Oh my, I still got the voice. Going back to the Iliad, actually, when my daughter started her education, she got a book to read during summer before she started in September at her school, and that was the Iliad. So we lived a whole summer with it, and the wisdom that you have there. So you asked how do we make change, and about Agamemnon on the beach. Well, when she ended her education, there came a book. I can really recommend it, and that's Steven Pinker. Steven Pinker, his last book, Enlightenment Now. You started to say that I was in favor of enlightenment, and I am. I think that knowledge is really what we must have, knowledge and trust to each other, and the responsibility. So that is the third part. So Steven Pinker and Enlightenment Now, because what can we do now? Well, we can focus on the us. Us, what can we do collectively to save the world, as you talk about, but also to make life better for us as living people together. That togetherness, that it's not black and white, and we need to have these discussions in between us. That kind of us, I believe, is the future. We haven't talked so much about all other foresight. Well, maybe we will talk about it this afternoon in the dialogue, because there is so many good things that we know now that we didn't know if we just go decades back. I mean, there is a fantastic development too. So even if there is a narrative of negativism, still there are plenty of people with good thoughts, and we must build on the good thoughts. That was what Dag Hammarskjöld did. He realized that he had to do that after the terrible Second World War. I mean, to really try to. And there are many other good persons like he was that we can build on. So let's keep feeling trust, because if we lose the trustworthiness in our society, then it's really, really, really dangerous. So trustworthiness will be my last word to carry from this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I would try to find the real commonality is a belief in what actually Louise Gluck ends her poem with. It is to believe in the effort, in the value of the effort itself, that it's not something that we can choose in a sense. We have to take the effort, and that's something that you said in your short interview as well, K.G. Hammar, that it seems impossible, but it must be done. So that's along the utopias. We believe in the effort and the small value that may have. And I think that this will agree very well also with all the people who are following the discussion from far away, because we know that also in parts of Africa and other parts of the world, they are following the discussion digitally. And I hope we can send this message that we want to be open and responsive and make an effort for whatever that may lead to. And that's for sure uncertain. So thank you very much to the audience for your silence and your focused attention and your nice smiles and laughs, which gave us courage to make this small effort. I'm extremely sad that this is the last time, but I very much look forward to be on the other side. That's my future. And last but not least, thanks to all our sponsors, without whom we would not be able to do this. And a very big, now you can really make an effort of a very big applaud for our speakers, Lotta Tuominen, Koge Hamar, and Bi Puranen. Thank you.